Welcome everybody to our information session on our 2 evaluation incubator opportunities. My name is Mara. I'm just going to be introducing us really quickly. We hope this will be a very informational session for you today. We encourage you to think of questions. We know many of you have come with questions. We'll have a 10-minute session at the end for some Q&A. So we'd ask you to put your questions in the chat throughout, and then also we'll have a time at the end for any questions that come up. In the meantime, we'd ask you to stay muted, please. And we want to let you know that we will be recording the session. For those who are not able to make it today, we'll have it on the website for future reference. Part of our recording is that if you are speaking and your video is on, that will show up in the recording. So we'd ask you to keep that in mind. If you prefer to have your video off, we welcome that. And any questions that you put in the chat will not show up in the recording. So if you're more comfortable with that, we encourage you to do that. And today we're going to go through a little bit about JPAL North America. We'll talk about the evaluation incubators. We'll talk a little bit about what makes a strong application, what we're often looking for. And then we're going to hear actually from a previous incubator partner, Shasta County Superior Court. And then we'll have a time for questions at the very end. And I will pass it over to my colleague, Anisha.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mara. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are at JPAL North America and the work that we do. So JPAL North America is a research center based in the Department of Economics at MIT. And our mission is broadly to reduce poverty by ensuring in policies informed by scientific evidence. And we do this through a number of different activities that aim to translate research into action. So we have our research work, where we fund and implement randomized evaluations to evaluate social programs that are aimed at helping people experiencing poverty. And we do this to determine what is working, what isn't working, and the degree to which programs have the desired impact on participants. Next, we have our policy work that aims to ensure that research and evidence is translated into policy and practice. And we work on making sure the results of our evaluations end up in the hands of policymakers, decision makers, and we do this through synthesizing research results, building partnerships with governments, lending technical assistance, and supporting the scale up of proven programs. And then finally, we have our capacity building work, where we lead evaluation trainings to build the capacity of nonprofit and government leaders to utilize and generate evidence. The next slide. Great. So at JPAL, we have a global network of affiliated researchers that work in many different disciplines. And our researchers are located in universities all around the world. And we've highlighted some of them on the screen, which you can see here. And then in terms of our work in the US, we have partnered with organizations and state and local governments from across 22 states and Puerto Rico to develop over 30 evaluations since 2016. And you can see those partnerships reflected by the states and territories in orange. So at JPAL North America, we specialize specifically in randomized evaluations, which are a type of impact evaluation method. You'll maybe have heard of randomized evaluations referred to as randomized control trials or RCTs. So in an RCT, study participants are randomly assigned either to an intervention group where they receive an intervention that's being tested, or to a comparison group that does not receive any intervention. And the key advantage of randomized evaluations is that due to random assignment at the start, the intervention and comparison groups do not differ systematically at the beginning, given you have a large enough number of people. So what that means is that on average, observable characteristics, so things like age and gender, as well as unobservable characteristics, so that could be something like motivation, should be evenly distributed across the different groups that you have part of your evaluation. And as a result, any differences in outcomes that researchers are able to measure between the two groups, or however many groups you have at the end of the study, can be attributed to the intervention rather than to other factors in your environment. So in other words, RCTs really help you to understand what specific changes to participants' lives can be attributed to your program. And this understanding of program impact is really vital to ensuring that limited resources are well spent on programs that are actually making a difference in the community that you're working in. However, it is important to note that a randomized evaluation may not always be feasible. So one of the goals of this incubator is for our staff to work with your organizations to determine if an RCT is a good fit for your context and for your organization. So some examples of where RCTs may be useful include if a program is oversubscribed, if you're maybe modifying an existing program that you already have, or if you're running a pilot program. So we really encourage you to check out the resources that we're sharing in the chat on randomization, and also be sure to sign up for office hours with either the housing or state and local team to go over any questions that you may have about including randomization within your context and within your organization. Great, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about the evaluation incubator opportunities that we are opening right now at JPL North America. So we have two that we're opening up right now. The first is our Housing Stability Evaluation Incubator. And for this one, all service providers, whether you're a community-based organization, a continuum of care, or a public housing authority that aims to reduce or prevent homelessness, are eligible to apply. And this incubator provides organizations the opportunity to design a high-quality randomized evaluation of a policy or a program that's aimed at preventing or reducing homelessness. And studies designed through the incubator have the potential not only to assess the impact of the program in question, but also to produce insights for how to foster housing stability across the entire US. And at JPL, we're particularly interested in proposals that advance the research agenda that's outlined in our evidence review, and we'll share a link to that in the chat, as well as proposals that seek to evaluate a program at the intersection of housing and other fields, so such as education or health, as well as proposals that aim to advance racial equity. And while those are definitely projects of interest for us at JPL North America, we do want to make it clear that we are open to any topic as long as it is related to homelessness or housing stability. And now I'm going to pass it back to Mara, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the state and local evaluation incubator opportunity.
Yes, so the second opportunity that we have available this round is for state and local governments. And this is an evaluation incubator opportunity very similar to the one that Anisha has just described, except this one is open to any state or local government agency across the United States. And so there's no specific sector focus, and it's very broadly open across the whole United States. So if this seems like a fit for you, then this would be the one to apply to. And if you have any additional questions about which opportunity to apply to, we highly encourage you to reach out to us and ask. And I'll pass it back to our next speaker, to Amanda.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Lee. I kind of manage the evaluation incubator process overall. As Mara and Anisha both highlighted, there are two separate opportunities, but they both everything I say will apply to each of those. So they are both on the same timeline in the same process and everything like that. So I will briefly talk about kind of the application process. And then after that, I will next highlight the services provided. Karen, I see you have a question in the chat. I will address that kind of as part of my presentation. So the application process for the evaluation incubator is a two-stage process. The first is really just that letter of interest application. So you can see the call for letters opened on August 1st, and we are having the information session today, and folks are able to complete and send in those letters of interest on a rolling basis through October 17th. I'll talk a little bit later in this presentation about what should go into this letter. And as we review your letters as they come in, we will invite some applicants for a brief interview just to learn a little bit more about your application, opportunities for evaluation and randomization. Next slide, please. And so this is the rest of that application process. So in November, we will select kind of the group of finalists who will receive what we call proposal development support from November through February of 2023. So the goal of the support is really just to help finalists prepare a very strong full application. And so we'll go into more depth with folks about their policy question of interest, their proposed solution, and delve into some of those more technical things about what is an appropriate sample size, what are any logistical constraints, things like that. JPL staff will certainly help with that. And so we definitely plan to provide you all support with more of those technical questions. And then February 2023, we will set a specific date, though it's still to be determined, will be when those full proposals are due. And then in March of 2023, JPAL will select and notify the partners of their award in March of 2023. Next slide, please. So this slide highlights the services that partners, so that is those who made it through both the letter of interest and the full proposal stages of the application process. This slide highlights all of those services that will be received. Broadly speaking, partners will work to design or determine the feasibility of a randomized evaluation and will develop a partnership with an academic researcher to later conduct an evaluation. And the main goal of this phase is for JPAL and researchers to help partners turn these pressing policy relevant research questions into a design for a randomized evaluation. And so this will be done through a few different activities. The first is matchmaking to a researcher. And so JPAL will work to find a researcher within our network of researchers who's interested in your question and your potential evaluation, and we will facilitate introductions. Organizations that successfully match with the researcher from our network would be eligible to apply for future evaluation funding, and so that's kind of a separate process. The second is training and capacity building. We recognize that running an evaluation of any kind and running a randomized evaluation is maybe a new thing. And so all finalists will receive the opportunity to attend our Evaluating Social Programs course in June of 2023. But in addition, we really want to build all of our partners' capacity for evaluation and use of data and information in general. And so even if at the end of this an RCT isn't feasible, we really want to give you the tools to be able to better create and use evidence in your decision-making in the future beyond this particular engagement. I know there was a question about funding. So partners through this process may be eligible for flexible funding of up to $50,000. And this funding is really intended for proposal development. So it's for activities to help you all develop an evaluation. It is not funding for the evaluation itself. Folks usually use this funding for things like staff time to attend the training, staff time to work with JPAL staff, things like that kind of over this period once they've been deemed as partners. And then finally, this last piece is technical assistance and support from JPAL to kind of really all facilitate and make this all happen. And so broadly speaking, technical assistance is provided by both policy and research staff at JPAL North America and includes things like project management, research support, and training is needed to really help partners develop feasible and policy relevant opportunities. This technical assistance focuses on developing a project and not actually starting or implementing an evaluation. Some examples of what technical, yes, Lauren, what I am talking about now is for the finalists. So everything on this slide is for finalists. So that will be from March 2023 onward. Technical assistance, generally, some examples might include, developing a theory of change to understand how you get from your question to your outcomes and how you measure all of those things. Conducting power calculations, so really trying to identify that right sample size, things like that. So broadly speaking, this is this full process that would start in March of 2023 for full partners. Next slide, please. Beautiful. So, kind of what's next, what might happen during an evaluation incubator for full partners. Our, of course, primary goal and primary hope is that we introduce you to a researcher who's interested in your question, and they, plus JPAL, work with you to develop a plan for an RCT that you can conduct together in the future. Folks who successfully matched, you'd be able to submit a proposal to JPAL for full or pilot evaluation funding in the future, as well as look for other possible funding sources as the team. And we hope that, your RCT is feasible and will happen in the future. However, this doesn't always happen. There are many reasons that a RCT or an evaluation might not be feasible. Sometimes it's not feasible for a whole host of reasons. And sometimes we can't predict those at the beginning of a project or at the beginning of this kind of review process. So, for example, a program or policy might change, making it difficult to run. Your sample size might not be as large as expected, or data acquisition could be harder than you thought. Or perhaps it's just not the right time for whatever reason. So generally speaking, if it becomes clear that a RCT isn't feasible before the planned end of the research support period, JPAL staff may step back from the project as a whole, as we're no longer able to work towards that main goal of designing an RCT. However, we really want to emphasize that JPAL staff that your researcher might still be interested in working with you on something else, maybe a non-randomized evaluation, or maybe a randomized evaluation further down the line. So just because something isn't feasible now does not mean that your researcher may not want to continue to engage with you. But in addition, as I mentioned before, we really want this engagement and this experience to be useful to you all generally beyond this specific interaction. And so we will work with you and your organization to make sure that you can at least use general evaluation knowledge and capacity in general. So we might, for example, if we know an RCT isn't feasible, we might work with you to help improve your data collection strategies in general, or provide training to a full department of your staff before ending the engagement. And so these are potential things that might happen if an RCT isn't feasible. It might mean that you're not receiving support for quite as long as initially intended. We are good. Next slide, please. So I'll talk now a little bit. I know lots of folks have questions about kind of what makes a strong application. What are we looking for? Things like that. Next slide, please. I think you can click through all of them. Beautiful. We will drop in the chat shortly, and this is all available on our website, the full list of instruction documents, which have a whole section on exactly this, what makes a strong application. I'm going to highlight some of the more important ones. And so the first is just really a clear description of an important policy question or challenge. And we want to know exactly that, what challenge or question or problem is your organization or the specific program trying to solve? And importantly, is it one that aligns with JPAL North America's mission to reduce poverty? A second important factor for us is this a promising approach to addressing that question or challenge? And by promising approach, we simply want to know more about why you think your, whatever it is, program, policy, intervention is promising, and why you think it's something that might work. You perhaps may indicate how long the program has been running, if it's, say, a long-standing program. Any other measurement or factors that you have. These, of course, can be non-experimental to show the success of your program. And perhaps the ability for you all to run and implement this program. So we're looking just to see that something is possible, and we're curious about previous information that's already available to show that this is something that's promising. Third, a commitment to using evidence to inform decision-making. I know this sounds a little vague, but we're really just understanding, is your organization and stakeholders involved in what needs to make this happen? Committed and interesting to using evidence and data. So perhaps we might want to know things like, do the stakeholders necessary to make this happen have buy-in to the project and the idea of evaluating? For folks who are working as part of a state or local agency, is there a demonstrated commitment from senior leadership to evaluate? You might describe the current data or information that you already collect as part of your program already as an indication that you all are committed and interested in using data and evidence. And we do really recognize that running an evaluation, not just randomized, but of any kind, does require collecting information from individuals in your program. And so this can be a difficult thing to do and to get buy-in or permission to do. So this question is really just aimed at us wanting to understand that you and your team has support to do this type of thing. And then finally, this is the fourth one we're highlighting today. There's a longer list in those application materials that Anisha has linked in the chat. It's just a clear description of how your proposed evaluation may address racial equity. And so We at JPAL North America really recognize that Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities face higher rates of poverty and more challenges in exiting poverty due to economic marginalization that's caused by structural racism in North America and in the United States. Therefore, we're particularly interested in knowing about if and how your program or intervention or evaluation idea will address racial disparities. For example, does your program or organization primarily serve certain types of communities? How does your organization think about racial equity generally? So this is just a taste to give you a sense of, what we're looking for when we make this initial review. The full instructions, as I mentioned, include the full list of our criteria. You can also reach us at any time as you write your LOI and schedule office hours if you have any questions about this. I will now turn it over to Bridget to talk through the next piece.
Great, thanks so much, Amanda. Hi, everyone. My name is Bridget. I am a policy and training manager at JPAL North America, and I work on our homelessness and housing stability team. So I'm going to turn us to our incubator partner discussion. So we do have a former incubator partner who has joined us from Shasta County Superior Court. And so we'll hear from them about their experience participating in a prior incubator. Through this discussion, our hope is really that participants joining us today and also those who are tuning into this information session later on will gain a better understanding of the services that we offer through the Evaluation Incubator, as well as the experiences and lessons learned directly from an incubator partner. Next slide, please, Mara. Awesome. So before we kind of dive into the discussion, first we wanted to share the key stakeholders involved in the project, who you will see on this slide. So first is Sean Watts, project manager at Shasta County Superior Court, which is the branch of the California Superior Court with general jurisdiction over Shasta County, which is located in Northern California on criminal and civil matters. The Shasta County Superior Court initiated the project by bringing research questions to one of our evaluation incubators before. The project also involved Emily Owens, who is a professor in the Department of Criminology, Law, and Society at the University of California, Irvine, and who is also part of JPAL's network of affiliated professors. So JPAL North America connected Emily and Sean through the Evaluation Incubator, and Emily led the research team that eventually conducted a full randomized controlled trial connected to this project. And lastly, there was Matt Rivas, who's the Director of Operations at Good News Rescue Mission, which is a nonprofit in Redding, California, which is located in Shasta County, that provides resources and services for individuals and families experiencing homelessness. So many individuals experiencing homelessness in Shasta County have some connection to Good News Rescue Mission or use their services. And so Sean reached out to Matt in order to explore possible research process collaboration in this case. So our partner discussion today will feature Sean. Before we start that discussion, I thought it would be helpful to just provide a bit of background on the evaluation we will be talking about that prompted the application to the incubator. So we'll go to that next. All right, great. So to set the stage, we are going to be talking about evaluating efforts to reduce the rate at which individuals fail to appear to court in Shasta County, California. So back in 2019, Shasta County Superior Court submitted a proposal to JPAL North America's state and local evaluation incubator. At that time, it was called an innovation competition. For those who may have followed JPAL over the years, we've since sort of rebranded to call it Evaluation Incubator, but they're the same program. And at that point, they were interested in designing a randomized evaluation to test different strategies for reducing the likelihood that defendants awaiting court processing in the community fail to appear for their arraignment. So in terms of the particular challenge, Shasta County was experiencing high rates of failure to appear, which can lead to additional fines and in some cases arrest for what might otherwise just be a minor infraction, which can lead to serious long-term effects impacting an individual or their family's economic well-being. So in Shasta County's context, the court knew that about 30% of those who fail to appear also experience homelessness. Shasta County wanted to assess different strategies that they could use within their court system and in partnership with other organizations to help reduce the rate of failure to appear, both generally among folks summoned to appear in court, but also specifically among those who were experiencing homelessness. So fast forward a little bit, the court was selected to receive technical assistance and funding through the incubator. And through the support provided during the incubator and the connection made with Emily Owens, who became the principal investigator for the study, they were able to narrow down the many strategies sort of initially proposed for addressing this issue to focus on a specific program for evaluation. And so the program we're going to be talking about is a program that was direct outreach by the court via text message, which was a departure and a transition from phone calls that were used previously for this program. And again, given the high rates of homelessness among those who failed to appear in Shasta County, the research team also partnered with Good News Rescue Mission, who I mentioned on the prior slide, consulting with their staff members and clients through focus groups to learn more about how the text messaging approach would be received and also to help craft the message. So again, fast forward a little bit to today, preliminary results indicate that text messaging does lead to a decrease in failure to appear. And so based on these preliminary results, Shasta County Superior Court has since changed the way they notify those who are charged with a crime or civil infraction of their arraignment time by adopting text messaging notification platform. So that was the change that was sort of made. So I know I shared a bit about the evaluation, and I guess without further ado, we're going to go to our next slide and bring Sean Watts into the conversation. So Sean, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, Bridget, thank you. I'm Sean Watts. I'm a project manager at the Shasta County Superior Court in Redding, California.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Sean. I know I shared a bit about your project and sort of what may have motivated you to apply for the Evaluation Incubator, but I'd love for you in your own words to share what led Shasta County Superior Court to apply for the Evaluation Incubator, and why did you feel your program was a good fit for randomized evaluation?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, we have a huge failure to appear problem here, as probably most jurisdictions do throughout the country. So we knew we had this big problem and we wanted to do something about it. We had done research on FTAs, as failure to appears are referred to, and we found that texting was a good way to reduce them, in addition to many other things, direct mails and calls. So we wanted to implement something like that. We have been calling people here, defendants who had court dates prior to texting them, but we weren't able to tell if it was really doing anything. We measure our FTAs, but they weren't going down, so we didn't know what was actually happening. So since we had this problem, we collect a lot of data on our defendants, as most courts do, and we knew we had some possible solutions to the FDA problem. We wanted to actually prove what could work for us. So that's what led us to the Evaluation Incubator.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Sean. And as a follow-up question to that, I did introduce sort of your partnership with Good News Rescue Mission. Could you talk a little bit about what made Shasta County and Good News Rescue Mission interested in partnering with one another on this endeavor?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, our FTA rate includes about 30% of people who are homeless. So with that in mind, we wanted to do the best way we could to reach out to those people, and the Good News Rescue Mission seemed to be the best way for us to do that. They can house over 400 people there on a daily basis, and so that obviously was a good conduit for us. Conversely, the Good News Rescue Mission, their mission is to help people and to get them through the system and to help them get into a productive life, and eliminating their court appearances is one way to do that. So they have contact with the homeless. They have an excellent database of who they're in contact with and who uses their services. So we felt that we could potentially partner with them, maybe even send a court employee down to the rescue mission to help them interact with people who potentially had court dates. So that's why we started out thinking that would be a good conduit. It didn't turn out to be, as we will probably talk later, but it started out to be a good idea.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Sean. I'm gonna go on to our next question, which is, could you talk a little bit about how being a part of the Evaluation Incubator helped launch the study?
Sure. Before we even knew about the evaluation incubator, we had the FTA problem. We had a lot of data about it. We knew some strategies that possibly we could use to counteract the FTA situation, but we didn't know how to study it. We don't have research analysts here. We don't have extra staff who can devote the time to doing a project like that. So our parent organization, the Judicial Council of California, research analysts there, knew that we were interested in attacking the FTA problem, and she referred us to apply to the JPAL Evaluation Incubator. So that's how it got started. And then once we applied, that gave us the tools we needed to actually start going into a project. So, and the first tool that we needed was funding, of course. So the court doesn't have additional funding to hire staff to do research. So the amount we got was used to hire me to conduct the study with Emily. So that was the beginning of it. The technical assistance part also helped us with the evaluation. As we just saw in the presentation, the evaluation can be daunting. It's in my case, it was a 5-page single-spaced typed document. So the assistance that we got from JPAL throughout that was very helpful with getting it done. And then what it also did for us is to focus our ideas on a solution to a problem. Because we had to fill out the application that asked for specific details of what we want to do, that created a good outline for us to follow to come up with solutions to what we did. And then of course, the very important part of the technical assistance was the pairing and the matchmaking with Emily that occurred with the University of California at Irvine. And without her and her staff, we wouldn't have been able to do the project at all.
That's super helpful, Sean. I was going to ask as a follow-up question, but you already answered my question, which was sort of how did the support provided by JPAL kind of help your particular organization? It sounds like you were able to use the funding to go to staff capacity to move evaluation efforts forward, and definitely that partnership with Emily was super valuable to you.
What I also should have mentioned is that the social programs course that JPAL offers to the applicants was very helpful for me. You know, I was able to go back to MIT for a week and attend the course, and that taught me everything I know about randomized controlled trials, which was nothing before I attended the course. So very helpful.
Oh, that's great to hear. And just to zoom out a little bit, so we do provide, for those who are selected through the incubator, we provide scholarships and spots for organizations to attend our annual Evaluating Social Programs course, which, as Sean mentioned, kind of helps practitioners, policymakers, researchers kind of better understand randomized evaluation. So it's great to hear you had a good experience with that course, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. Great. So you mentioned your data practice and data collection processes just a bit. I want to go a little bit deeper into that question, if that's okay.
Sure.
We're curious how your agency approached research and data practices before your partnership with JPAL and how this changed afterward.
Okay. Well, we have a case management system at our court, which I assume most courts have, and that collects a lot of data on defendants and cases so that we can keep things moving through the process. So we have a lot of data. We prepare reports on a lot of things like failures to appear, but we really don't conduct any research using it because we don't have the staff or the knowledge to do that. So we didn't really think of our data in a research mode before this project. And what was your other question?
So I guess my follow-up question was sort of how did that change afterward, and maybe what did you find kind of challenging about embedding evaluation into your programs and operations?
Yeah, so what we found challenging were a couple things. Namely is that with data, you have to have partners involved to conduct the evaluation, and that can be difficult sometimes. Sometimes the partners aren't able to do what you need them to do, aren't able to provide the information that you can. So that's an issue. We think of our data now as far as how valuable will it be in an RCT type situation? Will it give us the power we need or the numbers that we need to provide a meaningful conclusion. So in those ways, we think of data differently now than we used to.
All right, great. And just to go a little bit further on this theme, reflecting on the evaluation process, what are some ways that you see agencies like Shasta County court system as uniquely positioned to generate and use evidence?
Yeah, as a public agency, you know, we're obviously unique from private agencies in that we exist to serve the public. So in that aspect, we're a little different. We're not looking to generate profits or anything. We're just trying to help people get through the court system. We collect a lot of information on defendants that they're required to give us, which in a lot of other situations, people might be able to not provide information when they're asked. But in our case, they're pretty much required to provide what we need them to provide. So we're unique in that aspect too. But the main reason that we're unique is that we're here to help people. So the information that we collect and the RCTs that maybe we conduct are just there to help the public.
Great, thanks so much. So my next question kind of touches on the program change that Shasta County made after the evaluation. So I shared in the overview that you've since kind of updated the program and adjusted the program as a result of the randomized evaluation. Could you share a little bit more about what that process was like?
Yeah, sure. Before the evaluation, we were calling people on the phone, calling defendants on the phone who had court dates upcoming with the court. And we found that there were a lot of issues with that. We didn't have good numbers. They didn't answer the phone. It was just, we were unsure if it was working at all. So we knew that texting was an option for improving failure to appear rates. And we wanted to validate that would actually work in our jurisdictions. The previous studies that were done were mainly in large jurisdictions like New York City. So we weren't sure that they would work here. So we conducted the evaluation. Emily actually conducted the evaluation, and she was able to show for us that texting could reduce our FTA rate by as much as 20% if we were to have good phone numbers. So what we found with this project is that we don't have good phone numbers in our system. Many of them are disconnected, or as you can imagine, with the homeless situation, they lose their phones get stolen. So the phone numbers we have are not good. So in that respect, we're now more focused on getting accurate phone numbers than we were before. Another way that we've changed our thinking is that we thought that we could go and possibly implant a court person at the Good News Rescue Mission to interact with their clients as they saw them every day. But the study that Emily conducted showed us that even though there are a lot of people who are homeless there at the mission, there are not many who have a court date upcoming in a short time after their visit, so that it would be effective for us to remind them of their court dates. So, for example, they might have a court date that's a month away from when they're at the Good News Rescue Mission, and it won't do us any good to remind them that they have a court date a month from now. So we've now learned that's probably not a good idea for us to focus on the Good News Rescue Mission as a conduit to send their clients the information about the court that we need them to have. And likewise, we found with texting, we segregated the homeless or people who we thought were homeless from the non-homeless population as far as our texting goes. And we found that texting the homeless population was basically ineffective. They didn't respond to the information that we gave them. So in that respect, we now know that texting is effective. We need to improve our number database, and how we interact with the homeless is a little different in our minds than it used to be.
I see. Thanks for sharing, Sean. It sounds like those preliminary results gave you lots of things to consider, some ideas for potential changes and future investigation, and some actionable next steps for you to change existing programs. So thanks for sharing all of that. So just the last question for you before we open it up to see if any of the agencies and organizations joining us today have questions in addition to what's been asked already. So just would love for you to share any other advice you may have for the organizations or agencies in the Zoom room now or listening later who are interested in evaluating a program and applying to one of the incubators that we have open now.
Sure. Well, I think the first bit of advice I'd give is that the program is worth it. It takes some effort to get it going, to apply, and it can be a lengthy process. I think in our case, from the time I first submitted the application to the time the RCT was completed was close to 3 years. So it can take some time for this to happen, but if you have patience, it's worth it because you'll get a meaningful product in the end. As far as the application goes, I reviewed my application recently, and I think a good piece of advice would be to pay attention to the specific questions that the application asks. And just like applying for a grant or things like that, if we answer every item that the application refers to, then it increases our odds of being successful with the application. I would say if a person has an opportunity to attend the social evaluations course, like I mentioned earlier, it's very worthwhile. It will give the novice a basic understanding of an RCT. You won't be able to go and conduct an RCT after that course, but at least you'll know what the researcher is talking about. And then lastly, I would say, as a bit of advice, to have as many ideas to try and solve your problem as you can. With our application, we knew we wanted to reduce the failure to appear rate, but we had 3 or 4 different strategies that we could potentially conduct an RCT on that gave Emily some options as far as creating an RCT and evaluating which one would give us the best power or just the most likelihood of succeeding. So I think those would be helpful.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. This has been very helpful. And I think this is a nice transition just to kind of open it up to, again, to those who are here. If there are additional questions, thank you for those who have already put questions in the chat. Just would welcome any further questions via chat, or people can feel free to unmute and ask directly. Oh, I see. By what date must the project be evaluated to be underway? We have some interest in being able to develop a project that is currently being proposed. That's a really good question. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Amanda, who you saw present earlier, to take that one.
Sure. Hi, Anissa. I'm going to give a perhaps not satisfying answer, very similar to the one I gave in the chat, which is this is not a fast, there's a specific date, it must be a new or an old program. I would say give us as much information about what's being proposed and how it is similar or different from what you've already done. And that will really help us understand if it's possible or not. This is also a great question to maybe take to one of our office hours so we can learn a little bit more about your specific context. But it's not out of the realm of possibilities to evaluate something that has not yet started, if it's a new program.
Oh, great question. So at least on the housing stability side, we have created a Calendly, which is a nice tool that shows our availability. So you're able to actually engage directly with that tool to set up a time that shows. And Mara, I'm looking at you. Is it the same process for the state and local evaluation incubator?
Yes, it is. So using the links that I know Anisha had put them in the chat earlier, we can drop them in again in case you've joined since that time. These kind of provide a flexible way to schedule whenever you are free and whenever we are free as well. So we don't have preset specific office hours.
Great, thanks, Mara. And I did see there were some sample size questions in the chat. Thank you for engaging with those. It seems like those have been answered, but would welcome others to chime in if there are questions on that. I know we did have a couple questions kind of going into the the webinar, that were on the registration form about staff capacity. I know Sean spoke a little bit about that in terms of what Shasta County was able to do with the flexible funding from JPAL. Would also invite others to kind of chime in if there's still lingering questions related to staff capacity for evaluations or other things that were raised. And in the meantime, I'll just remind everyone, October 17th is the date. I know it's been said multiple times, but that's the date for you all to submit your letters of interest to let us know if you're interested in participating and being considered for either one of the incubators. Great. Are we sure there's no other lingering questions? We are happy to field.
I guess while we're here, hi, this is Emily Owens. I was the research partner with Sean Watts. About the power calculation and the sort of technical aspects of what an RCT involves, that's really where the research partner comes in. I think, as was mentioned in the chat, if you provide information about your context, just an idea of 30% of people are failing to appear. That gives JPAL some idea about whether or not it's going to be feasible to do an RCT. And then later, during that sort of post initial award process, when Sean and I were talking with Nat Rivas, the Community Rescue Foundation, we talked with a couple other service providers and went through some other possible options. During that sort of post initial award period is where the researcher is going to figure out some of these really like mathematical, statistical analysis issues. So those are not things that you as a practitioner need to do. That's where we really step in and figure that sort of stuff out.
Right, and I saw a question similar to that about what's the size of the team that's needed. For example, the size of our team was me, and our IT staff occasionally came into the picture as Emily needed to draw on some data. But as far as doing the research, the researcher does, I would say, 99% of it, and the actual applicant is just there to provide their end of the project at the agency that submitted the application. So there's not a lot of, once it gets to that point of research, the researcher pretty much takes it over.
Yeah, and Sean and I had pretty regular meetings throughout the pandemic. That was a fun thing for us to go through together and deal with those changes, right? So we met regularly, and sort of keep Sean informed as to what was going on. As we were implementing the RCT, there's always sort of surprising things that happen on the ground. And so Sean was really our like eyes and ears as to how the RCT was sort of being received in the population. And then afterwards, we would talk through results. Sean, read our papers. He came to present with us when we presented our findings at an academic conference. So he continued to be involved, but a lot of the research and math was something that my team, which was another professor currently, who was at Claremont Graduate University at the time, and then I had some graduate students and some undergrads from UCI working with me on the analysis end.
Great. Thanks so much, Emily. We appreciate you weighing in. Amanda, I saw you come off mute, so I would welcome you to respond to some of those questions we got.
Sure. Yes, there were a couple questions in the chat. One was that, do you need to have an academic researcher coming in? The answer is absolutely not. This is exactly that matchmaking thing. We look for a researcher with you. However, if you happen to have some kind of researcher on your team already, academic or otherwise, we're certainly happy to work with them as well as our academic researcher, all on one big happy family. And then there is another question about how many projects are we looking to fund. As I mentioned, the funding is fairly limited for each project. As far as overall number of projects across both of these incubators, we're looking at somewhere between 10 and 15 at the absolute most. That's across both opportunities total, and that's for those partners. So the number of finalists, that kind of interim stage, will be a little bit larger than that.
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone for coming.